Good afternoon, and thank you for joining us for this session, IR35 in 30, Your Questions Answered. Whilst I'm your host for today, as the title suggests, we want this to be less of a broadcast and more of a town hall style event, with you being an active participant. We'll be monitoring questions through the Q&A box, so please do submit some questions as we go through this particular event. If we don't answer your questions in the limited time we have, we do only have 30 minutes, or because we need some more information, of course, then we will follow up on email. So please do, again, submit some questions. I'm not an IR35 expert. Thankfully, I'm joined by two people who are. Tanya Bowers, who is the General Counsel and Head of Public Policy at APSCO, and our very own Will Jones, Director of Harvey Nash Workforce Solutions. So what are we looking to achieve in the next 30 minutes? Well, back in November, Harvey Nash and Spinks published a survey with results compiled from both contractors and organisations. It threw up challenges including a lack of confidence in the guidelines, question marks about benefits and the value proposition, the negative effects of on contingent workers' well-being, and people not feeling as valued as they should. And it's fair to say that a good number of those questions remain unanswered, and many remain about the legislation. And now we only have a few weeks to go until it's introduced. So, two questions to answer. First of all, what on earth is Will Jones going to do once this is done and dusted? And more seriously, secondly, what is the latest advice for organisations and workers? Tanya, I will come to you. Hopefully, I can't see if your camera and microphone is on, but hopefully you're here.
I'm here.
I will start the first question by coming to you. With just 8 weeks to go until the changes come into force on April the 6th, first of all, who are APSCO and what role are you playing? And then what would be your primary advice to clients at this stage?
Okay, thank you. Thanks all. Right, firstly, APSCO, the Association of Professional Staffing Companies. APSCO has been around since 1999. It was actually formed because of the first IR35 rules coming in to lobby against those, and it was felt that tech companies, just like one of our members, Harvey Nash, were not represented by any other trade body. And I think to a certain extent we continue to be the only trade body that represent the professional staffing sector. Since then we've changed a lot. We've got United Kingdom, we've also got APSCO Deutschland, APSCO Asia and APSCO Australia, and we have recently just launched Outsource, an APSCO company, and that's focused at the MSP and RPO member as market, as they obviously have very different interests to recruitment companies. So that's enough about APSCO, I think. I've been with them for 4 years. I've been in the industry myself as a solicitor and running a big team for a global recruiter for 20 years again. So with just under 8 weeks to go, what should clients do? Obviously, I'm hoping that for most of you, you are partway along this journey. Although if you're not, don't worry, just get cracking. So what we say is make sure the right people are in the room, get together a steering group of all the relevant departments in your organisation that this affects. Understand where your contingent workforce is and how they supply to you, because this change only applies to personal service company contractors, only applies to contractors that are supplying their services to you, often and usually via a recruitment company through their own personal service company that they own at least 5% shareholding in and are usually a director of. Once you've identified that group that are currently live or contracts you're thinking about putting live before the 6th of April, focus on that group first. You, as from the 6th of April, are going to have to produce a status determination statement for every assignment that places a PSE company. that we're going to obviously talk about that in more detail, but it's up to you to do that, and it's up to you to take reasonable care doing that. So that means that whoever completes the SDS for your business has to understand the rules, has to talk to everybody involved at your organisation to understand what the assignment is and what the services are to be provided. And there are different ways in which that SDS can be produced, including using CES, the government tool that we're going to talk to. You then have a duty to pass that down the chain to the worker and to the next party in your chain of supply. So that's the primary thing you have to be ready to go with on the 6th of April. There's then other things like understanding how your contractors are supplied to you. But I'm conscious of time and there's lots of other questions, so I'll pass back to you, David.
Well, yeah, look, you mentioned CES. And by the way, I should say we're already getting a flood of questions. So we will try to get through as many of them as we can. But you mentioned CES. So, Will, if I come to you, with regards to CES, the check employment status for tax tool, it comes under a lot of scrutiny. What's your advice on how to make IR35 status determinations?
Thanks, Dave. And yeah, I think it is a really difficult challenge we have here, because it is publicly scrutinised, but it's a tool that HMRC have produced and they have said they will stand by it. So I think our opinion, our stance on this is use CES as a part of the evidence for the determination, but don't solely rely on CES. I think for me, the really important things that we look at is look at the contractual engagement and the working practices. And using these as a key factors of making that determination, and then additionally using CES as that additional piece of evidence. So it's not solely relying on that as a source of the truth, because I think there are areas where it doesn't look at, for instance, like mutuality of obligation. There's areas which come under scrutiny, like substitution, which is a real, people almost seeing that as almost what you might say the silver bullet to being outside of IR35, but actually, and Tanya, you might have a quite a strong opinion on this as well. I'm not sure, but yes, substitution for me is another area where people might look at getting an outside determination because they have the ability to substitute, but whether actually it's ever happened, can you trust that? And the CES tool at the moment, the way it's currently written, is if you give almost the unwavering right to substitute, you're automatically outside. So Tanya, I don't know if you've got a point on that.
I think with substitution, you're absolutely right. Just because you tick that box in CES does not mean you're free, and it's definitely outside. It has to be an unfettered right to substitute. That in the legal, it doesn't mean you have to have substituted that person before, but they have to have an unfettered right. The way we approach it is look at the services, think about the situation. How would you feel if they did just replace that person the next day, just sent someone else to do the services? Now, even though you might not have a right to reject a substitute in a contract, one way of getting around it is that the services have to continue to be delivered at the right level and fully competently. So therefore, you would always have the right, effectively, to say there's a breach of contract here if you weren't happy with the substitute because actually they didn't understand the project and they weren't delivering the services to the way you were expecting. So that is one way to be able to work substitution realistically into a contract. But be a tough judge. Genuinely think, would I accept a substitute in this contract? And don't just be swayed just because it's helpful.
I agree with that. I think the danger with that is also just having it as a contractual, almost ticking the box, and actually the working practices on the ground. You've got line managers, people who are bringing contractors into their organisation. Would they, in the day-to-day project environment, accept a substitute into that? So it's making sure that you are joined up, and I think that the working practices being superseding the contractual terms. I think that's the really important education piece across the whole organisation. This is what IR35 is. This is what it means. If people are going to be outside, we need to manage them in the correct way, which means if we are going to accept substitutes, we accept substitutes and we deliver projects. And with the knowledge that we will substitute. Well, if a contractor offers a substitute, we've given them the ability to go and do that and manage it accordingly.
I'm keen that we do get into some of the questions that we're getting through from those people attending. One more, though, I suppose, from the client point of view before we do that. And Tanya, I think this might be one for you to jump in on. But outsourced services, is that being looked at as a silver bullet to take away some of the headache involved here?
Well, just to explain what an outsourced service is, this is where a client contracts out a service to a third party. Think of, let's use an example of a large accountancy practice, and the worker's true client is the party to whom the services are provided to. So if you outsourced, if you totally outsource, for example, the running of your IT help desk to a company, then actually it would be that company that was responsible for running your IT help desk and the SLAs and everything like that, that would be the client in this case. And therefore, if they were going to use personal PSC contractors, it would be that party that would do the SDS and not the end client. Because of that break in worker services. This sounds great for clients. The sting in the tail is, however, if it's not a genuine outsourced service, then the reality is that the client did not fail to meet its off-payroll obligations. It should have done an SDS, it didn't, and therefore it remains the deemed employer. It continues to carry the employer tax risk and the NIC risk on that contractor's income. So therefore, yes, if you genuinely have an outsourced service, go with it, but don't use it as a means of avoiding IR35. I think for all the parties in the chain, it is just easier and less risky to face up to outside IR35 rather than trying to push things into outsourced service heading that genuinely isn't an outsourced service, because it's all about what happens in reality. It's not about a contract or a set of statement of work terms.
So let's dive into a couple of the questions that are coming through from the audience. Will, this might be slightly better aimed at you, given the work that we do at Harvey Nash. It's going to be tricky for you to answer this exactly, but maybe some sentiment. How many companies are rejecting PSC companies and insisting on using umbrella companies? It'd be good to see what your feeling is around what our clients are doing there. And then why are companies asking for the names of directorships of companies?
The first question, it's really hard to quantify exactly across the market. I don't think anyone has that data to hand right now. We're seeing a different opinions in different areas of the market. Financial services, we've seen them go down a route quite publicly. In the press, we've seen many stories that have been banding around how they've gone away from PSC workers and into more of the PAYE or umbrella company only routes. And organisations of in a regulated environment of that size, of that nature, you almost can't blame them for that because of the size and nature and the quantity of the contractors they have to manage. The safest thing around IR35 is being able to manage an individual determination on a case-by-case basis. So if you've got thousands of contractors in your organisation, to do that is really tricky. So it's without not trying to, I want to answer the question, it's a decent split across. I think more medium-sized organisations, they're probably more looking at this where they've got a contractor pool of around 50 to 150 contractors. That's probably easy to manage, so they'll probably be going more in the environment of making case-by-case determinations and utilising PSC. But we're seeing differences across the industry.
Okay. And
the second question, sorry, Dave, was, remind me again.
The second question, let me just come back to it. Why are companies asking for the names of directorships of companies?
I assume from that it's the link to a company's house and just doing an investigation into the company itself to make sure they're actually a director of that limited company.
Okay. Tanya, a quick one that's come in as well. If I could direct this to you, what is the impact of remote working on contractors' IR35 status? Obviously, that's entirely prescient given the world that we're operating in at the moment.
I don't think it has much impact. I mean, I'm an employee of APSCO. I'm working from home. You know, employees are working from home. Everybody's working from home. So if I'm honest, I don't think it makes a huge amount of difference in the current environment because it is the norm. So to a certain extent, disregard that and look at other factors that suggest the lack of control or a lack of being part and parcel.
Would you say, I'm just on that question, Tanya, I'd ask you kind of a question. Would you say though that because of working in a remote distributed teams, actually you can almost work directed maybe the one to, but work in a way, have the working practice in a way which is easier almost to be outside of IR35 because there's less control, there's less part and parcel of the organisation, there's less, there's less restriction. Do you reckon that would help, or you think that's actually probably going to still be a weak point?
I mean, yeah, you're not sitting at a desk and you're not turning up 9 to 5:30, but are you expected to be logged on at 9? Are you expected to stay logged on till 5:30? As I said, I genuinely, I think it's a bit of a red herring.
Yeah.
Question, one more from the audience before we switch back to some of the stuff that I know that both of you are keen to talk about, and we will keep referring back to the ones that are coming in. But what, if any, recourse do we have for an organisation making a blanket ban on PSC engagements rather than individual assessments?
Shall I take this one? I don't mind. Yeah. I think there's a difference between a blanket ban, a blanket assessment, a decision not to use or not to have personal service company contractors in your supply chain. That is a decision a client can make. And role-based assessments. So blanket assessments, you can't just say that all your workforce is inside. That's a blanket assessment. You can't do it. Role-based assessments, clients can make role-based assessments, but actually they're quite restricted. It needs to be the same role. They need to be on the same working conditions and on the same contract. So in the public sector, where, for example, a set of nurses might all be on the same pay grade, the same terms, then that's appropriate. In the private sector, I think there's less scope for that, for role-based assessments.
Okay. Will, anything to add?
Yeah, I think it's a good answer. I think from my side, I'd just add that moving away from limited companies, PSC contractors going forward, it's an organisation decision to make. They're entitled to go down the route of we only want to engage umbrella or PAYE only. They're fully obliged to go and make that decision as an organisation from a strategic perspective. I do think though that there will be as in any type of legislative change, or there's a drastic decision, and then it's kind of that change curve kind of reduces, and people maybe find a new normal. So I think what we see in April to what we see maybe in 12 months' time, with the market changing, we've obviously hopefully been over the top of the pandemic, we might see a different stance in some of these organisations. So I think where we are today in April probably isn't going to be where we are in 12 months' time.
Will, if I stay with you, where we have a client-led dispute process, is there any advice that you would give to a client in shaping or running that process?
Yeah, I think there's a few points that I'll probably make to that question. I think first of all, it's making sure if a contractor has raised a dispute, we listen from the supplier's perspective, from the end client. So we actually take stock of that, and we actually gather their evidence as to why they would dispute the determination, whether it be inside to outside or outside to inside. We need to understand what's their point of view, and I think for me, it's giving that channel and the right process for them to raise that dispute, produce their evidence, and that to then be reviewed fairly and openly within the organisation itself, and really giving them that voice and that chance to look at it. I think where there's a conflict in information, it could be an error, a determination has been made in error, and actually the contractor is right. So rectifying that quickly and being available for that to put them at ease, I think is a really good thing. But actually, I know one of the challenges with CEST is where you get these undetermined, where you can't make a determination, undefined determination from CEST. So I think from there, my recommendation is probably go to an expert third party to go get some additional advice on that approach. So you've got a real rounded view, and you've given the contractor a real good voice and a really good opportunity to express their views.
And look, if we just stick with you for a second, there's a lot of talk about being ready for April the 6th. However, this is just the start of the new normal, right? There's a term that we've heard a lot of this year. But certainly with regards to IR35, what's your advice to clients to manage the flexible and contingent workforce going forward post-April?
Yeah, kind of links back to what we just talked about, where we are in April, probably will be in a different place in 12 months' time. And it's, I think for me, it's setting up the organisation that you can respond and you can understand what's happening, learn from others, or be a first adopter, either way, but making sure that you do get the best skills into your organisation. I think for me, you've got the level there of the strategic. What's the best way of our organisation to cope with, especially across our area, technology change and digital? What's the best way for the organisation to be ready? What's the best way of getting the skills and the capabilities into these organisations that they can pivot, respond, keep up with that dynamic demand that's coming for the organisation? So it's having those routes to market, whether that be contractors, inside, outside, permanent apprenticeships, looking at even things, SOW, outsource, offshore. There's many different routes to getting good talent into your organisation. So I think that this for me is that opportunity to make sure you are having those strategic conversations, looking at your workforce and getting ready. So that's the strategic point. From a tactical perspective, there's also things you just want to make sure you don't forget. For instance, you make a determination in April on a contractor in your organisation. Are they remaining in that same role throughout that duration? Does their role change? Does their project change? You need your governance, your process management, all of this around that. So in April, you've made your determination, but actually going forward, that determination remains accurate going forward. So I think, yeah, there's two sides. So strategically, the workforce getting the best skills, capabilities into your company or into your organisation, but also tactically, IR35, how do you manage it going forward? Thinking about both points.
Tanya, I'm just going to come back to the questions that we've got coming in from the audience, and we have got loads. Substitution keeps coming back up in the questions, even though we've spoken about it. Forgive me if we're treading over ground, but this one stood out, and I think it might be quite interesting just to address quickly. So this person asks, working in a life sciences contract, it requires a specific knowledge and qualification that can't be substituted. Does that fall into IR35?
I think it is quite hard in certain industries like life sciences and banking to, effectively be able to substitute. The way our clause is drafted, it's, the substitute has to have the same security clearance, has to have effectively been cleared for compliance by the client beforehand to be able to substitute. So it does mean that in certain industries, of which life sciences is one, and it's also a highly controlled industry, it is hard to substitute.
I think this is one that we've not touched on yet. I'm not sure, Will, Tanya, who would like to tackle this, but when do you expect IR35 legal test cases to start happening?
That's definitely a Tanya question.
Well, they're happening all the time. Obviously, there's a MOO one, there's a mutuality of obligation one that HMRC are hoping will cement their position. I guess realistically, HMRC have made it clear that they are not going to use any status post 6th of April, as a sort of trigger to investigate a contractor that was working pre-April. So if they were working outside pre-April, they then get an inside assessment. If they switch to an umbrella or to inside IR35, then there's not that. They're not going to, HMRC aren't going to use that as they're not going to use that as a trigger to sort of investigate unless there's fraud or something like that. So, I mean, it takes a while, doesn't it, for cases to come through the tax tribunals, to be disputed, to come through the tax tribunals. So I would have thought 9 to 12 months. But the reality is the law's not changed. It's the same law, it's just different processes. So, cases come through all the time. And this isn't the end of IR35. It's not the end of outside IR35 contracting. And there will continue to be cases on the key law around it, which is substitution, control, MOO, and then some, things like part and parcel, having other clients, etc. All those things that together paint the picture of being either inside or outside IR35.
I suspect this next one as well might be best aimed at you, Tanya. So I think it has legal implications. But is there a risk to work for the same client as a contractor and then switching to umbrella after April?
Well, yeah. As I said, HMRC are not. They've said and I believe them, that they're not going to use the fact that this person then pops up as an employee on the same intermediary quarterly reporting as a trigger to open an investigation into what happened pre-April. So, everybody's got their own position on HMRC, but, they are being very clear about that. So it shouldn't be a risk. Though I think most contractors don't want to continue with the same assignment being treated as outside IR35 on the 5th of April and inside on the 6th of April. I think most contractors would prefer a termination and reissue, even if they're still working through their personal service company inside IR35.
On top of that point, in the public sector, that's a lot of the changes we saw, is that when these changes came into effect 2017, we saw many contractors, if they were deemed inside, actually because they had somewhere to go, they had the private sector to fall into, especially across technology and change and digital. There was almost this get out of jail free card of going back into the private sector. You could move away, so that had more disruption in the public sector. Obviously now this is now in the private sector, there's nowhere to go. So I think that ability to go and jump somewhere else is going to be probably more challenging right now, and it's just negotiating that transition as best as.
Well, a couple of logistic questions for you from a Harvey Nash point of view. How long does it take to move to umbrella PAYE? E.g., how many days or weeks would Harvey Nash need to get a contractor set up?
Really good question. I think for that, depending on the volume on that day, and I think our compliance team might shout at me for saying 24 hours, but almost the same day. But obviously, with lots of contractors, that take a little bit of time. I think we work with a PSL of umbrella companies. The reason we have a PSL is that we ensure that they are operating in the correct manner. And I think there's always this thing with umbrella companies. If it sounds too good to be true when you're working for an umbrella company, sometimes it often is, and it's about finding the right umbrella company with the right service, and that's what we've done. We can manage that due diligence across the supply chain and making sure they're giving a really good experience to all our contractors. So what I would recommend is any contracts that find out who the PSL of umbrella companies are, speak to a few, find out who that gives you the best experience, the best engagement, select with them, and then that can probably be through maximum 5 working days.
And just to stick with you for a minute, is there a working practices checklist that we can use to help shape our approach?
I think that from a HMRC, there's lots of guidance that they've released. And actually, compared to, again, the conversation about me and Tony had earlier, actually, the guidance now is in a much better place than it was 4 years ago for the public sector. So there's some really good insight into that. So that's worth looking at from that perspective. But I think for me, it's around putting that together to say that's the best route. Speaking to, if it's a Harvey Nash contractor working for us at the moment, we can definitely have some view on that and give some more detailed advice. But yeah, from a I think the best place for me to go would be HMRC's guidance papers at the moment.
Look, we've had over 30 questions in this half an hour call. So as I said, we will get back to those that we haven't answered via email. So apologies if I hadn't got to your question. However, we've only got a couple of minutes left, and one that keeps coming up actually is a question that we'd already assumed that we might want to talk about. And Tanya, I'll come to you on this one. The reforms were postponed at the 11th hour last year. What are the chances of it happening again?
Well, never say never with IR35, but I think, HMRC are very clear. Yesterday at the CBI at a meeting APSCO attended, they were very clear it's going ahead. I think it's going ahead. If there's any movement, then it's probably going to be at the budget, but genuinely, I really do think this is it, and frankly I think that's for the best. I think however prepared or ill prepared you feel, this has already taken up too much time of businesses time they've got allowed over the last few years, and I think it's now time to personally just get on with it.
Never say never, but we're expecting it to go ahead. We're all guns blazing, trying to get everything sorted in time for April the 6th, and working with clients and contractors to make sure from our perspective, we think it's happening.
Light at the end of the tunnel, Will.
Yeah, absolutely. We're getting there. We're getting there.
Yeah, and I think for contractors, I as I said before, it's not the end of outside IR35 contracting. they might, you know, it might actually be a good starting point for a genuine switch in relationships between clients and recruiters and contractors when they're working outside IR35.
We're out of time. So thank you to everyone who submitted a question. Will, thanks for your time. Tanya, thank you very, very much for giving us your time and also for APSCO's perspective. We hope that this session has been useful this afternoon. Of course, again, if you do have further questions, continue to get in touch. Will's details will pretty easy to get hold of. I'm sure you can also connect with him on LinkedIn, and we will get back to those that we haven't answered on email.
Thank you.
Thank you.